Welcome back to AP US History. This is part 3 in chapter 20, talking about the populist movement. Now, the Populist Party, the People's Party, will lose in the election of 1896. They will support William Jennings Bryan. He will take over a lot of the different causes that the Populist or the People's Party has, but they won't run a third party candidate again. Why did Bryan lose? Probably because he just couldn't convince northern workers, industrial workers, to come to his cause. He had some trouble winning the South, although he will carry most of the South. But probably the primary reason was some people felt very uncomfortable about a silver standard. But the urban voters, the middle class voters, workers, didn't really buy it. He didn't form enough alliances with other groups, and thus he didn't appeal to a wide enough base. When candidates are on the fringe or they're more extreme, it's hard to build a consensus. McKinley, on the other hand, had a pretty well organized campaign. He didn't speak a lot, and it was highly funded. He had a lot of advertisement dollars. He didn't have to go 18,000 miles by rail talking to different people. He had newspapers pretty much in his pocket, and so he's going in billboards and so forth. So his machine is working well. Uh, because of the election, the gold standard will triumph over the silver. 1900, the Gold Standard Act was passed, which confirmed the nation's commitment to the gold standard, and the silver issue is pretty much dead. This is seen as a victory for the forces of conservatism, not progressives. Um, Much has been said about the Wizard of Oz. Frank Baum, when he wrote this as an allegory dealing with the farmers in the West and the silver standard and so forth. So there was a lot of symbolism in this particular story. How did it play out? And you can hear the song here, Wizard of Oz, produced in 1964. Of course, in his book, they weren't uh, ruby slippers, but they were silver slippers, representing the silver standard. The parable of the populist, uh, tornadoes, what is Dorothy, Toto, Kansas, all of these were supposed to have been some kind of connection to the populist movement. Uh, and we'll kind of take a brief look at it. It's kind of interesting to look at. They're probably not going to ask you about this on the AP exam. Dorothy represented the West. The yellow brick road was the gold standard, according to the people analyzing the story. Silver slippers in the story that produced in 1964, The Wizard of Oz. She was wearing ruby slippers. The Scarecrow, representing Midwestern farmers and so forth. The Tin Man, the Eastern laborers victimized by the wicked Witch of the West. City of Oz is the Eastern establishment. The Cowardly Lion was supposed to be William Jennings Bryan. The Wicked Witch of the East is the corporations of the Eastern finances, the banks. Oz represented a ounce of gold or silver. The Wizard of Oz was actually Mackenzie. The Flying Monkeys were Plains Indians, and the Wicked Witch of the West was supposed to be the harsh frontier environment, droughts, tornadoes. That's kind of interesting to kind of look at that. The heyday of the Western populists, you can see that they had most of their support in the West, from the Dakotas to the Oregon and Washington, Texas. Um, shows you the victories, the Populist Party victories. Populist Party wins from 20 to 50% of the popular vote. Of course, territories are ineligible, and that's why they're in brown. Why did the Populism Party decline? This whole movement. One, the economy got better. Uh, Two, farmers were being replaced by larger producers. So the smaller farmer is sort of fading away. The race will divide the Populist Party, especially in the South, where there was a hatred of African Americans by white farmers. The Populist Party was never really able to break the loyalty that some felt towards the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party really takes up most of what they're fighting for, so they're really not necessary. There's some populist candidates still. Al Gore, some suggest in the election of 2000, John Edwards in 2008. Whether they were or weren't, who knows? The legacy of the Populist Party. Well, most of the time, third party candidates don't do well. Third party don't win too many elections, but they will influence politics for about 25 years. And some of their ideas will spill into the 20th century. They eventually do get railroad regulations, the Interstate Commerce Act. They did want to tax the rich, and so they will get an income tax reform coming. The 16th Amendment will allow the federal government to tax people over a certain income. They got the direct election of senators, which they wanted. Initiatives and referendums are not federal issues but state issues. Initiatives are bills put together by the people and then voted on. Referendums are bills sent to the people, and then they can decide whether they want the bill to become law. Sub-Treasury plan continues. Farmers are going to get some relief from the federal government, and they do today in the forms of subsidies. Now we're going to turn our attention to African Americans in this period and what was actually going on with them, what were the conditions and some of the problems that they faced from 1865 to 1900. Resistance and repression are probably two words that you can place on the African American community. Most of them were abused and used. Most African Americans are sharecroppers in the South or making low wages in the North. They were resented by poor white immigrants because they were competing for the same jobs. Many African Americans go west, called the Exodus to Kansas. During the populist movement, the Farmers Alliance is going to be formed by colored people because they're going to be excluded from the White Farmers Alliance. At one time, they had 1.2 million people in the Colored Farmers National Alliance, which is a pretty significant number. Disfranchising African Americans. Whites feared that colored farmers would threaten white supremacy in the South, so that's why they're sort of kicked out of the White Farmers Alliance. They also had to pay a $2 tax to vote, and they had to prove that they were literate. Of course, white people during this time were unable to read, but they are grandfathered in, and they don't have to pay the poll tax. They have what they call the grandfather clause. It said if your ancestor had voted prior to 1860, you were exempt from poll taxes and literacy tests. Of course, this was designed just specifically to hurt African Americans. There was legalized segregation. Jim Crow laws simply separated blacks from schools, transportation, restaurants, theaters, hotels, drinking fountains, golf courses, swimming pools, one for white, one for black. Supreme Court upheld these Jim Crow laws in the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, and this is going to come down in the mid 1890s. Lynching was common in the South. If you were accused of certain crimes, no trial, they just took you out and hung you if you were a black man. African Americans speak out against injustices done to blacks, but not many are listening. One white writer, Ida B. Wells, who was also a muckraker who went after Standard Oil, led an anti-lynching movement and helped to form the NAACP. Booker T. Washington called for a compromise on segregation. He didn't like segregation, but he thought that it could be settled politically. He encouraged people to receive education and vocational training, and eventually they would be accepted by the white community. He dies a broken man at the end of the 1900s or the 19th century. W.E.B. Du Bois is another activist. He was the opposite of Booker T. Washington. He wanted segregation to end now. He believed that blacks and whites should be treated the same. Helped form the Niagara Movement, which is going to be the forerunner to the NAACP. And it sought to end segregation through legal means. He had what he called the talented tenth of the black community should immediately have full access and privilege to things in the white community. And of course, the NAACP is going to be formed in 1910, and this is going to advance the civil rights of African Americans. And we'll stop right there.